In the shadowed corridors of ancient Egyptian tombs, beneath layers of gold and precious stones, lies one of history's most disturbing secrets. For over 3 millennia, the pharaohs of Egypt systematically destroyed their own bloodlines in pursuit of divine purity. What began as religious devotion became a genetic catastrophe that would claim the lives of countless royal children and ultimately contribute to the fall of one of history's greatest civilizations. The glittering treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb have captivated the world for a century, but they conceal a darker truth. Behind the golden mask lay the malformed skull of a teenage king whose body bore the unmistakable marks of generational inbreeding. His collection of 130 walking sticks wasn't ceremonial. They were medical necessities for a ruler whose legs could barely support his weight. Ancient Egypt's royal families believed their blood was divine, flowing directly from the gods themselves. To maintain this sacred purity, they practiced systematic incest on a scale that modern genetics tells us was nothing short of catastrophic. Brother married sister, uncle married niece, and cousins united in unions that were celebrated as holy, while slowly poisoning the very dynasty they sought to preserve. The practice wasn't born of ignorance or accident. Egyptian royal incest was a calculated religious and political strategy, deeply embedded in their understanding of divine kingship. The pharaoh was considered the living embodiment of the god Horus, and his queen often represented the goddess Isis. Just as the gods married within their celestial family, so too must their earthly representatives maintain the purity of divine blood. This belief system created a closed genetic loop that persisted for over 30 dynasties, spanning nearly 3,000 years. Each generation became increasingly vulnerable to the accumulated genetic damage of their ancestors. What the ancient Egyptians interpreted as divine suffering, the physical ailments and deformities of their rulers, we now understand as the predictable consequences of extreme consanguinity. The royal family trees of ancient Egypt read like medical case studies in genetic disorders. Cleft palates, club feet, spinal deformities, epilepsy, and premature death became hallmarks of divine lineage. The very traits that marked a pharaoh as chosen by the gods were often the symptoms of genetic collapse that would eventually claim their lives. Archaeological evidence from royal mummies reveals the full extent of this genetic disaster. CT scans and DNA analysis have uncovered a litany of congenital disorders, metabolic diseases, and developmental abnormalities that paint a picture of systematic biological deterioration. The golden age of Egyptian civilization was built upon the broken bodies of genetically compromised rulers. The pharaoh's obsession with bloodline purity extended beyond marriage into elaborate burial practices designed to preserve their divine essence for eternity. Ironically, these same mummification techniques would later provide modern scientists with the evidence needed to expose the genetic catastrophe that the ancient priests worked so desperately to conceal. Modern geneticists estimate that some Egyptian royal lines suffered from inbreeding coefficients approaching those seen in laboratory mouse colonies bred specifically for genetic research. The level of consanguinity in certain dynasties exceeded what occurs naturally in any wild animal population, creating a human experiment in genetic isolation that would have horrific consequences for generations of royal children. Egyptian creation mythology established the precedent for royal incest through the stories of their gods. Geb, the earth god, married his sister Nut, the sky goddess, producing the divine siblings Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Osiris then married his sister Isis, while Set married Nephthys. This celestial family structure became the template for earthly royal marriages, creating a religious imperative that would prove biologically disastrous. The concept of Ma'at, cosmic order and divine balance, required pharaohs to maintain perfect harmony between heaven and earth. Marrying outside the royal bloodline was considered a disruption of this cosmic order, potentially severing the divine connection that legitimized pharaonic rule. This religious framework created powerful incentives for incestuous marriages, even as the genetic consequences became increasingly apparent. Royal propaganda reinforced these beliefs through art, literature, and religious texts that celebrated sibling marriages as the highest form of divine union. Temple walls depicted royal couples as perfect divine beings, concealing the physical reality of genetic deterioration behind idealized artistic representations. The gap between religious propaganda and biological reality would only widen with each passing generation. The pharaoh's role as high priest of every temple in Egypt meant that royal marriage practices were not merely personal choices, but state religious policy. Deviation from established bloodline practices could be interpreted as religious heresy, threatening both the legitimacy of the throne and the cosmic order that maintained Egyptian civilization. Court officials and priests actively encouraged royal incest as their own power depended on maintaining the fiction of divine pharaonic authority. A genetically healthy pharaoh married to a foreign princess might have ruled more effectively, but would have threatened the religious and political establishment that profited from the existing system of divine kingship. The isolation of the royal bloodline also served important political functions, preventing foreign dynasties from claiming legitimate succession rights through marriage alliances. By keeping succession strictly within the immediate royal family, Egyptian pharaohs maintained centralized control over their vast kingdom and prevented the fragmentation that had destroyed other ancient civilizations. Regional governors and ambitious nobles were effectively excluded from royal succession through the practice of royal endogamy. This created political stability in the short term, but condemned the ruling dynasty to genetic instability that would ultimately prove far more destructive than any external political threat. The economic costs of maintaining genetically compromised rulers were enormous. Royal children required constant medical attention, elaborate supports for physical deformities, and often died before reaching reproductive age, creating succession crises that destabilized the kingdom. The resources devoted to supporting disabled pharaohs could have been used to strengthen Egypt's military or infrastructure. Egyptian medical papyri contain detailed descriptions of treatments for various royal ailments, many of which modern medicine recognizes as genetic disorders common in highly inbred populations. Ancient physicians developed sophisticated techniques for managing cleft palates, spinal deformities, and metabolic disorders, unknowingly becoming specialists in the treatment of consanguinity-related medical conditions. The reign of Akhenaten marks a turning point in Egyptian art and religion, but also represents one of the most severe examples of royal genetic deterioration. Born Amenhotep IV, this pharaoh displayed physical characteristics so unusual that modern medical experts believe he suffered from several genetic syndromes simultaneously, the result of multiple generations of close inbreeding within his family line. Akhenaten's elongated skull, protruding jaw, feminine hips, and possible hormonal disorders created an appearance so distinctive that he ordered artists to abandon traditional idealized royal portraiture in favor of realistic depictions that revealed his true physical condition. This artistic revolution, known as the Amarna style, provides unprecedented visual evidence of the genetic consequences of royal inbreeding. The pharaoh's radical religious reforms, including the abandonment of traditional Egyptian polytheism in favor of monotheistic worship of the sun god Aten, may have been influenced by neurological conditions associated with his genetic disorders. Some researchers suggest that temporal lobe epilepsy, common in highly inbred populations, could have caused the religious visions that drove his revolutionary changes to Egyptian theology. Akhenaten's queen, Nefertiti, was likely his half-sister or close cousin, continuing the pattern of consanguineous marriage that had already severely compromised the royal bloodline. Their 6 daughters all showed signs of genetic abnormalities in artistic depictions, and DNA evidence suggests that several died in childhood from complications related to inbreeding. The couple's male heir, originally named Tutankhamun and later known as Tutankhamun, inherited a catastrophic combination of genetic disorders that would ultimately kill him before his 20th birthday. Mummy analysis reveals that this young pharaoh suffered from multiple congenital conditions that made him dependent on mobility aids and vulnerable to infections that would have been minor in a healthy individual. Akhenaten's failure to produce healthy male heirs created a succession crisis that contributed to the collapse of the 18th dynasty. The genetic damage accumulated through generations of royal inbreeding had finally reached a point where the dynasty could no longer reproduce effectively, threatening the continuity of pharaonic rule itself. The city of Amarna, Akhenaten's revolutionary capital, was abandoned shortly after his death, and subsequent pharaohs attempted to erase all memory of his reign from official records. This historical amnesia may have been motivated not only by religious conservatism, but also by embarrassment over the visible genetic deterioration that had made the royal family a source of shame rather than divine inspiration. Modern CT scans of Akhenaten's mummy reveal the full extent of his physical abnormalities, including possible Marfan syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome, and temporal lobe epilepsy. The combination of these conditions would have caused the elongated features, hormonal imbalances, and neurological symptoms that characterized his reign and influenced his religious innovations. Akhenaten's legacy extends beyond art and religion to provide modern science with a case study in the extreme effects of human inbreeding. His reign represents the moment when accumulated genetic damage became so severe that it fundamentally altered Egyptian culture, forcing artistic traditions to accommodate the visible reality of genetic deterioration among the ruling class. Tutankhamun ascended to the throne at age 9, already bearing the genetic burden of multiple generations of royal inbreeding. His short life and early death provide perhaps the most thoroughly documented case of genetic deterioration in any ancient royal family, thanks to extensive scientific analysis of his mummy and the exceptional preservation of his tomb contents. The young pharaoh's collection of 130 walking sticks wasn't ceremonial regalia, but medical equipment necessitated by severe physical disabilities. CT scans reveal that Tutankhamun suffered from multiple foot deformities, including clubfoot and a missing toe bone, that would have made walking extremely painful and difficult without mechanical assistance. DNA analysis of Tutankhamun's mummy has revealed the presence of multiple genetic disorders, including a cleft palate that required surgical repair and spinal abnormalities that caused chronic pain and limited mobility. These conditions, common in children of closely related parents, turned the teenage pharaoh into a living symbol of the genetic costs of royal inbreeding. The pharaoh's immune system was so compromised by genetic factors that he suffered from multiple simultaneous infections at the time of his death. Malaria, which normally causes mild illness in healthy individuals, became a life-threatening condition in a body already weakened by genetic disorders and chronic health problems. Tutankhamun's burial equipment includes an elaborate collection of medical devices, including splints, mobility aids, and what appear to be early prosthetic devices. The tomb's inventory reads like a medical supply catalogue, revealing the constant health challenges faced by a genetically compromised ruler in the ancient world. The young pharaoh's marriage to his half-sister Akhenaten continued the pattern of royal incest, but their union produced only stillborn daughters whose mummies show severe genetic abnormalities. These failed pregnancies represented the genetic dead end that royal inbreeding had created, making it impossible for the dynasty to continue through natural reproduction. Tutankhamun's death at age 19 ended the male line of Akhenaten's family and created a succession crisis that contributed to political instability in Egypt. The genetic deterioration that had claimed his life also threatened the continuity of pharaonic rule, demonstrating how biological factors could influence major historical events. The exceptional preservation of Tutankhamun's mummy has allowed modern scientists to conduct detailed genetic analysis that reveals the full scope of ancient Egyptian royal inbreeding. Comparison with other royal mummies shows that his genetic disorders were not unique, but representative of widespread genetic damage throughout the royal family tree. Modern medical experts who have examined Tutankhamun's remains estimate that he would have required constant medical attention and mechanical support throughout his brief reign. The resources devoted to managing his health problems would have been enormous, placing additional strain on a kingdom already facing external military threats and internal political challenges. The irony of Tutankhamun's legacy lies in the contrast between his fame as a symbol of ancient Egyptian grandeur and the reality of his life as a disabled teenager struggling with the biological consequences of his ancestors' marriage choices. His golden burial mask conceals the malformed features of a young man whose royal blood had become a genetic curse rather than a divine blessing. The later dynasties of ancient Egypt, rather than learning from the genetic disasters of their predecessors, intensified the practice of royal inbreeding to unprecedented levels. The Ptolemaic dynasty, established by Alexander the Great's general Ptolemy, created a genetic isolation so extreme that it makes even earlier Egyptian royal families appear genetically diverse by comparison. For nearly 3 centuries, the Ptolemaic rulers practiced systematic brother-sister marriage with only rare exceptions. This created a family tree that resembles a genetic ladder rather than a branching structure, with each generation inheriting identical sets of genetic damage from both parents. The biological consequences were predictably catastrophic, producing rulers with severe physical and mental abnormalities. Cleopatra VII, the most famous member of the Ptolemaic dynasty, was the product of at least 8 generations of systematic inbreeding. Despite her reputation for intelligence and beauty, genetic analysis suggests that she likely suffered from multiple inherited disorders common in highly inbred populations, including metabolic problems and possible neurological conditions. The Ptolemaic obsession with bloodline purity reached such extremes that they often married full siblings rather than the half-siblings favored by earlier dynasties. This doubled the genetic damage passed to their children, creating levels of consanguinity that exceed those found in any other human population in recorded history. Court records from the Ptolemaic period describe elaborate medical treatments for royal genetic disorders, including specialized diets for metabolic problems, physical therapy for skeletal deformities, and medications for neurological conditions. The royal physicians became unwitting specialists in the medical management of extreme inbreeding effects. The political implications of Ptolemaic inbreeding were severe, as genetically compromised rulers struggled to maintain effective control over their kingdom. Frequent civil wars between siblings competing for the throne were exacerbated by the fact that many potential heirs suffered from mental or physical disabilities that made them unsuitable for leadership. Cleopatra's famous romantic alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were not merely political calculations, but desperate attempts to introduce new genetic material into a bloodline that had become biologically unsustainable. Her children with these Roman leaders represented the first genetic outcrossing in the Ptolemaic family for over 2 centuries. The fall of Ptolemaic Egypt to Rome marked the end of the last independent pharaonic dynasty and the conclusion of over 3 millennia of royal inbreeding. The genetic deterioration that had made effective rule increasingly difficult contributed to the political weakness that allowed Roman conquest and the final extinction of pharaonic civilization. Modern geneticists who have studied the Ptolemaic family tree estimate that the later members of the dynasty had inbreeding coefficients approaching 0.5, meaning that half of their genetic material was identical by descent from common ancestors. This level of genetic similarity is unprecedented in human populations and would be considered extreme even in carefully controlled laboratory breeding programs. The Ptolemaic period provides a natural experiment in human genetics that has informed modern understanding of inbreeding, depression, and the importance of genetic diversity in human populations. The dynasty's systematic self-destruction through consanguineous marriage serves as a biological cautionary tale, with implications for contemporary genetic research and medical practice. The scientific analysis of Egyptian royal mummies has revolutionized understanding of ancient genetics and provided unprecedented insights into the biological consequences of systematic inbreeding. Advanced imaging techniques, DNA analysis, and comparative studies have revealed the full scope of genetic damage accumulated over millennia of consanguineous marriage within Egyptian royal families. CT scans of royal mummies show consistent patterns of genetic disorders across multiple dynasties, including skeletal malformations, cranial abnormalities, and evidence of metabolic diseases. These findings have allowed researchers to trace the inheritance of specific genetic disorders through generations of Egyptian rulers, creating the most complete picture of inbreeding effects in any ancient population. Molecular genetic analysis has revealed that many Egyptian pharaohs suffered from rare genetic disorders that are virtually unknown in outbred populations, but common in the offspring of closely related parents. These include enzyme deficiencies, immune system disorders, and neurological conditions that would have caused severe disability and shortened lifespans. The preservation techniques used in Egyptian mummification have inadvertently created a unique repository of ancient genetic material that allows modern scientists to study hereditary diseases across centuries of human history. This biological archive provides insights into genetic disorders that cannot be obtained from any other source. Comparative analysis of royal and non-royal mummies from ancient Egypt reveals stark differences in health outcomes, with royal individuals showing significantly higher rates of genetic disorders, physical deformities, and premature death. This data provides compelling evidence that the social practice of royal inbreeding had measurable biological consequences. Modern medical experts who have examined Egyptian royal remains estimate that many pharaohs would have required extensive medical support and assistive devices to function in their roles as rulers. The economic and social costs of maintaining genetically compromised leadership would have placed significant strain on Egyptian society and may have contributed to periods of political instability. The genetic legacy of Egyptian royal inbreeding extends beyond individual health problems to encompass broader questions about the relationship between biological fitness and political power. The Egyptian case demonstrates how cultural practices can override natural selection pressures, leading to the persistence of harmful genetic traits in human populations. Contemporary genetic counseling practices draw heavily on lessons learned from the Egyptian royal experience, using historical examples of inbreeding consequences to educate patients about the risks of consanguineous marriage. The pharaoh's genetic disasters serve as powerful cautionary tales in modern medical education. Research into Egyptian royal genetics has contributed to understanding of rare genetic disorders, with several conditions first identified in pharaonic mummies later discovered in modern populations. This ancient genetic research has practical applications for contemporary medical diagnosis and treatment of inherited diseases. The continuing study of Egyptian royal mummies using advancing technology promises to reveal even more detailed information about the genetic consequences of systematic inbreeding. As DNA sequencing becomes more sophisticated and less invasive, researchers expect to uncover additional insights into the biological factors that influenced ancient Egyptian history and contributed to the rise and fall of pharaonic dynasties. The tragic story of Egyptian royal inbreeding offers profound lessons about the intersection of biology, culture, and political power that remain relevant in the modern world. For over 3 millennia, one of humanity's greatest civilizations systematically destroyed its own ruling class through genetic practices that elevated religious belief over biological reality, creating a cautionary tale with implications far beyond ancient history. The golden treasures that have made Egyptian pharaohs symbols of wealth and power conceal a darker truth about the human costs of unchecked authority and rigid ideology. Behind every gleaming death mask lay the malformed features of rulers whose divine status could not protect them from the inexorable laws of genetics. Their suffering serves as a reminder that no amount of gold can compensate for the biological damage caused by systematic inbreeding. Modern genetic science has revealed the full scope of the Egyptian royal genetic disaster, showing that the practice of consanguineous marriage created levels of genetic damage previously unknown in human populations. The pharaohs became unwitting subjects in a multi-generational experiment that demonstrated the catastrophic consequences of extreme genetic isolation. The persistence of royal inbreeding across 30 dynasties and 3 millennia reveals the power of cultural beliefs to override biological imperatives. Egyptian civilization's commitment to divine kingship created a system that valued religious purity over genetic health, ultimately contributing to the weakness that made pharaonic Egypt vulnerable to foreign conquest. The contrast between Egypt's cultural achievements and its rulers' genetic deterioration illustrates the complex relationship between individual fitness and civilizational success. While genetically compromised pharaohs presided over architectural marvels and artistic masterpieces, their biological weakness created political instability that undermined Egypt's long-term security and independence. The Egyptian royal experience provides modern society with important insights into the dangers of genetic isolation and the importance of maintaining genetic diversity in human populations. As contemporary genetics advances toward the possibility of genetic modification, the pharaoh's tragic example serves as a warning about the unintended consequences of manipulating human heredity. The scientific value of studying Egyptian royal genetics extends beyond historical curiosity to encompass practical applications in modern medicine and genetic counseling. The world's most thoroughly documented case of systematic human inbreeding continues to inform medical understanding of inherited diseases and the importance of genetic diversity for human health. The irony of Egyptian royal inbreeding lies in its ultimate failure to achieve its stated goal of preserving divine bloodlines. Instead of maintaining purity, the practice created genetic pollution that weakened and eventually destroyed the very dynasties it was meant to protect. The pharaoh's quest for genetic perfection led instead to biological catastrophe. Perhaps the most sobering lesson from ancient Egypt's genetic disaster is the demonstration that even the most powerful civilizations can be undermined by their own cultural practices when those practices conflict with biological reality. The pharaoh's golden legacy serves as both inspiration and warning, a reminder that human societies must balance cultural values with biological wisdom to achieve lasting success. The mummies of Egypt's genetically damaged rulers continue to teach new lessons about human genetics, medical history, and the complex relationships between biology and culture. Their preserved remains serve as silent testimonies to the dangers of sacrificing genetic health for political ideology, ensuring that their tragic story will continue to inform and educate future generations about the importance of genetic diversity in human survival and prosperity.